In the quiet mountains, far from civilization, my mother-in-law's eyes locked onto me with cold disdain. "Take care," she said icily before slamming the door of her expensive SUV. The echo of the door closing cut through the still night, followed by the sound of gravel being kicked up as she sped away, leaving me alone under the pale moonlight. In that fleeting moment, I saw her face, the wicked smile and the predatory gleam in her eyes, sharp and unforgiving. It was as though she had already claimed victory. "Mom, why?" I murmured, my voice trembling, but she leaned out the window, her laugh ringing in the air like a sinister melody. "Goodbye, Emily," she hissed. "No one will come for you. By morning, you'll be nothing but prey for the wolves." Her cruel words struck deep, like ice seeping into my bones. The roar of her engine faded into the distance, and the headlights vanished, leaving me paralyzed with shock. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to reach someone, but it refused to turn on. Then it hit me, she had borrowed my charger earlier. This had been planned. She had lured me here with the pretense of showing me a perfect stargazing spot. I felt utterly foolish. Perhaps if I had tried harder to connect with her, or if I had managed things better with John, I wouldn't be standing here, alone in the cold with only the haunting sounds of nature. Fear crept up my spine, a chilling presence lurking in the shadows. The crunch of leaves and the sound of heavy footsteps drew nearer. My pulse quickened as I instinctively took a step back, unsure which direction to flee. The footsteps grew louder, closing in on me. "I'm Emily Matthews, 26 years old, married to John for 2 years. He's always been my rock, supportive and caring. Whenever I was overwhelmed by work or feeling sick, he would cook for me or find ways to make me feel better. Marrying him was the best decision I ever made. I come from a well-off family, but I worked hard to create my own life. I didn't want to lean on my parents' wealth, so I kept that part of my life hidden from John. I wanted to build my own future. John and I both worked in the bridal industry, and I loved my job. But then John made a life-changing decision. He quit his stable job to start his own business. Though I had my reservations, I supported him because I believed in his drive. But then, everything came crashing down. I discovered the truth. John had been involved with another woman from his college days, and worse, he'd racked up a $50,000 debt from lavish trips with her. I had no idea, and the revelation devastated me. To make matters worse, John started his business with the same woman as his partner, claiming that his family was backing him financially. His mother, Susan, adored him and justified everything he did, often treating me like I was the one trying to steal her son. John's sister, Megan, was even worse. She lived off him completely, refusing to work and claiming she didn't want to deal with formalities at a job. She was entitled and difficult, and trying to get along with her was draining. For a while, I put up with it all because I loved John, but Susan and Megan's constant presence at our home, rifling through my things without permission, treating my valuable items carelessly for their social media, took a toll on me. One day, Susan took my favorite brown purse without asking and broke it. I had hoped for an apology, but instead, she simply smirked and said, "It was bought with John's money, so I don't owe you anything." It felt like a punch to the gut. Even though I had a good income, replacing my things constantly was draining. I reminded Susan that the purse was something I bought before I married John, my first big purchase, the one I had worked so hard for. "Yeah, right," she scoffed. "Girls like you don't have money for things like that. Don't try to fool me." She had already labeled me as a gold digger, accusing me of spending John's money on luxuries. There was no talking to her. She only saw me as an adversary. When I turned to John for support, he barely acknowledged me. "Just hold on a bit longer. Mom's going through a rough patch," he said. It hurt, deeply, to feel like I was being ignored, even by him. I had always thought of myself as independent, but I felt utterly alone in that moment. Around that time, John's business started faltering. He could no longer keep up with Susan and Megan's expensive lifestyles. Eventually, he had to tell them he couldn't support them anymore. Instead of trying to change their ways, they devised a new plan: take some of Emily's money and give it to us. "Family comes first," Susan declared. I tried explaining that I split the living costs with John and used my own income, but they refused to listen. Their frustration only intensified, and for a while, they visited less often. I thought maybe they were starting to accept the reality of the situation, but I was wrong. They were scheming something far worse. When Susan discovered the truth about my wealthy family, her resentment grew. She became obsessed, convinced that if I were out of the picture, they could seize control of John's money and even inherit a fortune from me. Despite the fact that I hadn't written a will, She imagined millions, though the inheritance would go to my family, not hers. Her twisted mind hatched a horrifying plan. Knowing my love for photography, especially capturing the stars, she researched remote locations with little human activity and found a secluded spot where she thought no one would ever find me. "Out here, no one will ever find you. This will look like an accident," she told Megan. Megan agreed without hesitation. "I'll drive for you, Mom. We're doing this for John," she said, masking their true motives as though it were all for his sake, when in reality, it was all for their own benefit. On the day of the plan, Susan called me, her voice unusually sweet. "Emily, I know you love stargazing. There's a spot nearby with the most beautiful stars. Want to go?" she asked. Though I was hesitant, I agreed. They seemed so pleasant that day, chatting with me about beauty and fashion, even complimenting my hair. "I've always wanted a daughter like you," Susan said kindly. It felt off, but I wanted to believe that maybe they were finally accepting me. When we arrived at the spot, they encouraged me to step out and take photos. "We'll grab some things from the car and join you," they promised. I stepped out, taking in the breathtaking stars, but then I heard the sound of a car door slamming. Under the chilly night sky, I turned to see the SUV doors slam shut as Susan and Megan locked themselves in and revved the engine. "We're taking the house and car. Watch out for bears, honey," Susan shouted before they drove off into the darkness, leaving me stranded in the cold mountain air. My stomach churned with the realization that I had been left behind, but something inside me steadied my nerves. I had a plan in place. Back in town, Susan and Megan believed their scheme was complete. "We've taken care of everything," Susan grinned, her confidence soaring as they headed out for a celebratory dinner. But when they returned, their joy turned to shock. Police cars lined the driveway, and there I stood, calm and unhurt, flanked by my father and a group of officers. Susan was frozen, her mouth agape. How are you here?" she stammered. Megan tried to slip away, but the officers quickly stopped her. Thanks to my father's foresight, I'd activated an emergency backup system when I sensed things were wrong. My father, with access to a private jet, had acted fast. The stargazing location had made it easy for them to track me down. I had also recorded the entire exchange. My father had always told me to be vigilant and document any suspicious events. "We'll take the house and car. Watch out for bears." Susan's voice rang clearly from my phone, with undeniable evidence in hand. Susan and Megan were immediately arrested on charges of attempted murder and fraud. Susan fainted in shock, while Megan broke down, accusing her mother of the plot. And John? He was exposed for being in a relationship with his mistress all along. He turned on his own family, but it only added another betrayal to the long list. The media frenzy erupted as the story went viral. Susan was mocked as the mother-in-law who wanted millions, and the scandal spread. Headlines revealed how Susan and Megan had used my belongings for social media clout, leading to even more ridicule. John, once proud of his reputation, could no longer step outside without facing judgment. As for Susan and Megan, their disgrace deepened as their phone numbers were leaked, and they were bombarded with angry calls from strangers. By the following day, Susan and Megan's bank accounts were frozen, and all their assets were seized. Without John's support, they found themselves unable to afford anything. To add insult to injury, news of John's affair was exposed, completely destroying his reputation. The man who had betrayed me lost everything, even his dignity. I learned that John had been with his mistress since the early days of our marriage. The memories of his kindness now felt like a cruel joke. Why had he married me if he had never truly loved me? The pain of betrayal weighed heavy, but I decided to let go and move forward. Susan and Megan were evicted from their luxury apartment and forced into public housing, where their new address was soon leaked online. Susan, overwhelmed by the loss, grew mentally unstable, muttering about her ruined life. Megan, cut off from her family, struggled to find work, as her lack of skills and poor work ethic made it difficult. Desperate, she even reached out to me for help with finding a job in the bridal industry, suggesting it seemed fun. I ignored her. It wasn't a world she could simply step into, and I wasn't responsible for their downfall. Meanwhile, Susan moved into a decaying apartment surrounded by graffiti, a far cry from her former luxurious lifestyle. As for me, I left the house I once shared with John and returned to my parents' home. It felt safer there, though the scars of betrayal still lingered. One day, John unexpectedly called. Seeing his name on the screen made my stomach twist. "Emily, I'm so sorry, I've cut ties with my mom. Please, let's try again," he pleaded, but his words fell flat. How could I trust him again after everything? Maybe your mistress needs your protection more than I do, I replied, cutting him off. But Susan wasn't done. Desperate and bitter, she hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. When the detective found nothing, Susan latched onto a small detail, my PTSD. She thought she could exploit it. One evening, while walking alone, Susan appeared on the sidewalk. Her clothes were ragged, but her grin was twisted. "Guess the bears didn't get you," she sneered. Her words sent a chill through me, bringing back memories of that terrifying night in the mountains. She threatened to release a video of me unless I paid her, but her threat was empty. Her mere presence was enough to frighten me. She climbed into a car and sped off, leaving me shaken. I immediately called my father, who, using his resources, uncovered evidence of tax evasion and fraud in John's business dealings. When confronted, John had no choice but to confess. His mistress, Lena, was horrified to learn how she had been involved in his criminal activities. The lies unraveled, and their dirty dealings came to light. John's accounts were frozen, and he lost everything. Even Susan turned on him, abandoning him with a harsh, "You're no son of mine." Both Susan and Megan were left with nothing. Their greed and selfishness had led to their complete downfall. Despite it all, I focused on healing and rebuilding. My experience inspired me to help others escape toxic families and create new lives for themselves. With my parents' support, I opened a refuge center at the family retreat where I had once been rescued. It became a sanctuary for those seeking a fresh start. I even earned a counseling qualification to guide others through their pain. Over time, the refuge flourished, offering hope to those in need. One day, a woman arrived, escaping an abusive family. I reassured her, "You've done so well to get out. I'm glad I left when I did," she said, her tears giving way to a soft smile. I reminded her, it's okay to acknowledge the pain and set boundaries. With time, I found myself smiling again, finding joy in helping others rebuild their lives. As for Susan, Megan, and John, they continued to struggle, but I felt no pity for them. They were simply facing the consequences of their own actions. Meanwhile, the refuge became a place of healing, ensuring no one else would endure the kind of pain I once did. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.